please come up, take a seat.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Trevor Richmond. I am the Deputy Chief for Los Angeles Fire Department Valley Bureau. Before I get started, I want to introduce some of my colleagues that are here this evening. From Battalion 14, I have Chief Tyler Dixon. I also have Inspectors Arona and Inspector Smith from our brush clearance unit. They are subject matter experts when it comes to determining brush clearance interpretation of the ordinance. So I want to talk about a couple things. We're going to talk about the fire seasonal outlook for Southern California. Every year out of the National Fire Coordination Center in Boise, Idaho, they do a predictive analysis of the fire weather and the threat in Southern California. And the prediction for this season is very similar to last season. We all know last season we had the Woolsey fire, pretty catastrophic fire. Fortunately, did not touch the city very hard, and we escaped that one. There's still a lot of brush out there to burn. We really have two fire seasons in the state of California. Northern California typically starts burning in June and July and August. We don't see fire in Southern California until September, October, November. So we're right now in that time when we start to see those high pressures develop over the basin in conjunction with a low pressure over the ocean. And what does that give us? Santa Ana winds. We all know the Santa Ana winds. They come in at 35 miles an hour plus. Our humidities drop down to single digits, and we're off and running. And so we're just entering that time right now. So we do know we will get Santa Anas, and we do know the humidities will drop. So what is the LAFD doing about it? Well, I'll tell you, in the last several years since I've been in command of Valley Bureau, we've done a lot of things. We just recently added a new helicopter to our fleet, $18 million helicopter, AW-139. We continued our contract with Erickson Sky Crane for the heavy lift helicopter that can drop about 2,600 gallons. Pretty impressive piece of equipment. We've utilized it, me and Chief Dixon have utilized it in a lot of brush fires, a very effective tool. We also have agreements with LA County Fire to access their Black Hawk helicopters that are very, very, very good in brush fire initial attack. We also have access to the super scoopers. You might have seen the big yellow planes that dive down into the ocean and pick up water. We also have access to those. We also can have access to federal contract Type 1 retardant droppers, either out of Foxfield, Lancaster, or Emmett Ryan. We're very tight with those agencies out there in the Angeles National Forest and CAL FIRE, and we have access to aircraft. And the reason I say that is because Sherman Oaks presents a unique brush fire dilemma for us. Because of the concentration in the homes, our strategy, if we get a brush fire in the Sherman Oaks area, is to hit it hard as we can from the air and then bring our ground resources in. So it's very, very important that we have a robust air attack in the initial attack and the initial phases of the incident. So that's why we've got a really substantial, right here at Van Nuys Airport, it's at 6 helicopters, access to the super scooper and the heavy lift Erickson Sky Crane. So I feel very confident in our resource deployment posture this season. We also just recently deployed a multi-band radio that we can talk on multiple frequencies. Not that means anything to you, but for us as firefighters, we operate in the wildland primarily off of VHF frequency. That's the wildland firefighting frequency. For years, we had to carry a separate radio. So our people had 2 radios. And you can see how confusing that would be. We've now purchased a radio where we have both frequencies in one radio. Very, very streamlined, and I think it's gonna really be good for us this season. So, Richard, and thank you for inviting me here this evening, and Jules, the Honorable Jules, which I was informed he is the mayor of Sherman Oaks, honorary mayor of Sherman Oaks. Wanted me to talk a little bit about brush clearance and some of the things that you can do, what we refer to in the fire department as hardening the target. One of the biggest things you can do is comply with the brush fire clearance ordinances in the city. And I'm not going to read them verbatim because I'll bore you to tears, but one of the ones that we really emphasize is that 200-foot clearance between your home and the wildland. And the wildland is the native vegetation that grows in the Santa Monica Mountains. That's all that is. There's some other requirements that we have with trees and chimneys and roof lines and ornamental vegetation and trimming up your trees. And I won't get into the details of that. But one of the things that you can do, if a brush fire is in your area, all that stuff on your patio is fuel. The fire doesn't care if it's a tree or a patio umbrella. It burns just the same. So when there's a brush fire in your area or near your area, get all your patio furniture off your patio, put it in your garage. Anything that's combustible around your home, we call that a ladder fuel. Ladder meaning that fire starts in a small patio umbrella, very quickly spreads to the eave of the home, and next thing you know, the home is on fire. So that's one thing you can do to really help us. And then heed the evacuation warnings. We've been working with the Emergency Management Department, and we're working with a wireless emergency alert system. And you guys are probably familiar with that. You get Amber Alerts on it. Your phone, if you're in a geographic area, you'll get notified. Kind of annoying, kind of startles you. We're working with the Emergency Management Department, and we're transferring that responsibility to send those alerts right to the incident commander at the incident, where it should have always been. So it's going to eliminate that lag time of getting those alerts out. So when we send out an evacuation warning or an evacuation order, two different things. Warning, get ready. Order, get out. Okay, be prepared to get out. Look around your house. Look at the pictures that you really cherish. Think about what kind of box is that going to need to fit into. Think about these things now, because when we call those evacuation orders, our expectation is you're out of your house in 10 to 15 minutes tops. Okay, shoot for that time. Couple just recent ordinances that came out that I think are really going to help the city of Los Angeles and the Sherman Oaks area. Is everyone familiar with the ordinance about the metal cutting blades on the brush clearance? We had the metal blades and they were sparking. Okay, so that was an ordinance that was just passed maybe several months ago. I believe Peretz had sponsored that motion, turned it into an ordinance. It was anytime you're doing brush clearance with a blade, it has to be non-ferrous, okay, and it cannot be spark generating. And in addition to that, you have to have a fire extinguisher ready and handy within reach to put out a spot fire should you generate a small fire. So that's a great ordinance. The one that was just passed, and it's interesting we're doing this meeting tonight, this just happened at the beginning of September. Is everyone familiar with red flag and homelessness? The recent one, it was just in the LA Times. This just passed by unanimous vote on a red flag day. You guys are all familiar with red flag. That's when it's really bad. Well, for us, that means humidities are less than 15% and winds are greater than 25 miles an hour. That's what that means to us. Those are really hazardous conditions, and we'll see those. We typically, anywhere from 5 to 7 red flag days a season. When we have a red flag day, the police department is now authorized to go into the very high fire severity zones where the homeless are encamped and remove them from those very high fire severity zones. And we'll have social services there ready to receive them and accommodate their needs as we remove them. And that's really for them and for us, right? It's for them because if you guys remember, just a couple months ago, we had a grass fire in the basin. It was only 5 acres, but it moved very quickly. And the people that are living in the basin, that could have very easily overrun their positions where they were camped, and we could have catastrophic outcomes. So we have an ordinance now that allows the police department, working with the fire department and the social services that the city provides, to remove homeless people from the very high fire severity zones. I know a lot of you out there have questions specific to your address or your neighbor hasn't trimming up their trees. One thing I will tell you, there is a great website. It's LAFD.org. Go to that website, very easy to remember. Go to the fire prevention tab, and under the fire prevention tab, you will see brush clearance requirements, and you will see a map of the very high fire severity zone. Our ordinances are really only enforceable in the very high fire severity zone as it relates to brush clearance and being prepared for wildland fire. We have other ordinances we can use outside the zone, but it gets a little bit more complicated. The very high fire severity zones are not determined by us, they're determined by CAL FIRE. at the state level. And every year they give us a new map. We continue to build, not necessarily in Sherman Oaks, but in the north end of the valley. So those zones and those maps are increasing over time. But if you have concerns, I have both Inspectors Arona and Smith here to answer your specific questions, and they've provided some really great handout material on telephone numbers to call with specific issues. So it's wonderful material, so please access them if you want that material. Thank you.
Okay.
Before we go to Tim, a lot of people have asked over the years, what do? I clear my property and my neighbor could care less. And what do?
Okay, in that instance, we send out, and if I could get Inspectors Arona Smith come up here, because there might be a detail I might give out or a nuance that is not appropriate, because these are the subject matter experts. We require everyone in the very high fire severity zone to clear their brush as per the city ordinance. We give them a certain amount of time to do that, and if they don't do it, then they're mailed a notice of non-compliance, and then that starts the ball rolling on the non-compliance issue, and eventually, if they still haven't done it, we send it out to contract from a list of contractors that the city hires, and that cost of that job will be attached as a lien on their home or their mortgage to be reconciled at some point in the future. So, am I right with that?
Yes. Yes, the chief is right on that. Basically, so if you have that issue where you cleared your brush, but your neighbor hasn't, and you're in the very high fire severity zone, usually what we do, starting in May, we look at 140,000 parcels that are in the very high fire severity zone. So between May to June, we make an initial inspection. Then from June to July, we go back and check up on those parcels. The people have 20 days to comply once they get a notice. So that means if we started in May, but we didn't get to the 140,000 toward the end of June, then they usually have to comply toward the end of July or mid-July. So there is I have a handout on the table, and if just to double check, we have a new program called VMS3, and you can check your own property on those parcels by logging in, registering, and then what happens, a lot of people used to call us saying, is my property going to, and then now all of a sudden it's the new tab-based, cloud-based, so the minute the inspector's on site and okays it, uploads it, they'll go right to this LAFD VMS3, and it'll tell you whether you're clear or whether you're in violation. And if you're in violation, the inspectors are required to take 1 or 2 pictures of the violation and make comments. Now, to the question about your neighbor, if your neighbor hasn't cleared, he might be in violation, and because after the first violation, we give him a second notice, and then there's a little more time to pass, and we put it out to contract with the contractors. It's a lengthy process to explain, but if you go to LAFD-brush at lacity.org, that's our website. That's our email, basically, and you can call. There's a 1-800 number, but realistically, during our busy season, we have 3 or 4 ladies on the line answering, and it gets busy. But our email, if you email us your neighbor's address, then we can get back to you whether to tell them where they are in the process, or if they haven't been written, we'll send an inspector out there to write the property and to start the process.
Thank you. So I want to give Tim, we got a traffic problem.
Okay.
What is the solution? What is your job? And how are you going to make Sherman Oaks and the Valley more livable with less traffic? Or if not less traffic, at least moving traffic?
I wish there was an easy answer to all that. Let me tell you a little bit about me and what my responsibilities are with respect to the Department of Transportation. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking. I really wanted more to hear from you. But I want to thank Richard and SOHA for inviting me here. This is my second time here. I think it's really productive and very informative for both myself and hopefully for you as well, to talk about traffic and transportation. So, as far as the LA Department of Transportation, we're a large organization with a lot of different responsibilities. And one aspect of our department's role is what we call our district offices. We have 6 district offices throughout Los Angeles, 2 in the Valley. We have an East Valley office, which is what would represent Sherman Oaks. We have a West Valley office. So I oversee those 2 offices. I also oversee West Los Angeles. So basically south of Mulholland, west of La Brea, and everything north of Mulholland. It's a huge area with all kinds of different challenges. It's definitely not a boring job. There's lots of interesting challenges and things that need to be addressed in terms of transportation. So it's not all about traffic. Traffic is certainly a dominant theme, but I would sort of categorize, I would say there's 3 categories. One is congestion, and that's kind of traffic. One is safety, which is really always our primary goal, is to address those before anything else. The third is kind of more of a quality of life. So things like parking, or we also coordinate very closely with our interagency partners, and that includes the police department. Oftentimes there are issues with encampments and where restrictions like parking restrictions can help be part of the solution potentially in those cases. So we do a lot of that. We partner a lot with other agencies and organizations. We do a lot of coordination with Metro, and that involves those projects like the Sepulveda Pass Rail and the other bus rapid transit and the Van Nuys corridor as well. We get involved in a lot of the nuts and bolts of reviewing those and making sure that as those projects progress through their life cycle, that we share the issues that we have, and we are conscientious of the different ways that we can make those projects successful. Primarily from the district office point of view, we are the front lines for the department. So we interface directly with you, the community. We also interface directly with our council offices. And we are basically that. We are the front lines. So we are the portal for you to give us your concerns so that we may then investigate, explore solutions, and hopefully find ways to make those problems go away or make the situation better for you, the community. The primary way to do that is our online system. It's the easiest way to do it, and the address is myladot.lacity.org. I have business cards with that address in case you don't write it down. We get hundreds of requests every month, thousands really, probably, citywide. It's a lot for us to manage, but we certainly prioritize, and our effort is to try to get through those requests. We try to be proactive as well, but there's no shortage of requests. So our job is to really interact with you and find out what's going on in your communities and try to come up with solutions. Now, those solutions may vary. They're complicated at times. I know in terms of traffic and congestion, there aren't a lot of easy solutions. The main problem is there are just too many cars on the road, and it's hard for us to necessarily make that problem go away. We certainly want to encourage other ways to get around, and those types of projects and efforts were behind those. But we also know the reality. There's still a lot of people driving around in vehicles, and we know that some communities are disproportionately affected by that. We know that in the Sherman Oaks Hills, there are a lot of challenges. It's geographic, it's topographic, it's an issue of jobs and housing, it's an issue of the limited arteries that traverse the area. And so we're constantly looking at those issues, and we know that there's mapping apps that are contributing factors to some of those challenges. It's a really complex problem with no easy solution, but it doesn't mean that we're giving up. We're working closely with you, the council office, to try to address those issues. And I know that's one issue. It's a kind of an important one, but there are many other things that we deal with as well. And I could list many of them, but I'd rather hear from you. That's why I'm here. So we can talk about those things, and we can set up those lines of communication to continue to have those dialogues as we move forward. So I'd rather leave it there and then start the interaction with you.
One question that a lot of people are going to have is, I want a stop sign. I want the traffic is racing through the neighborhood. I want a stop sign. How do they get a stop sign?
That's a great question. That's one of the tools in our toolkit, a very effective tool. Through our online system, the best thing for you to do is put in that request. We approve stop signs very, very regularly. We have a system of guidelines that essentially help guide us as to where those tools specifically are appropriate. We look at things like speed. We look at the distance between existing traffic controls. We look at traffic volume. We look at safety, collision history, visibility, anything that might be potentially aided by a stop sign in this particular case. So that's one of the primary tools, and we do find it quite effective.
Okay, Jay?
Tim, I wonder if you can give that website out again one more time so that people can know where to go if they'd like to get a stop sign or a traffic signal put in.
Of course, it's myladot, myladot.lacity.org.
Okay, before we begin, before I figure out how this works, I'd like to say relative to the Deputy Chief Richmond's comments on fire. He was talking about preparation, and I will tell you that's a critical thing to take into account. My wife and I had a fire about 15 years ago due to an electrical problem at the house. It wasn't a community fire. And I want to tell you, when you're involved in a fire, that's the last time you want to be thinking about what to do, because we were more concerned with other things than packing up safe belongings. We had our pets with us, but it's something you should consider in advance, because there's nothing that'll quite give you as good a time. It's after they take the axes to the front of your house. That's not so bad. It's when they take the fire hose and direct that in your front door. That's a real thrill that hopefully everybody will be able to avoid. So I thank Deputy Richmond for his comments, and I urge you as well to think in advance about these catastrophes. Many of you did supply some questions. I'm pretty good, but I'm not a total seer, so some of these I may mess up a little bit. I'll try not to. They're, for the most part, fairly simple. Joan Tentakalis. Is Joan here? Joan's over there hiding behind the post. I think, Tim, that you touched upon what she has to do, but she commented that on Riverside Boulevard between Van Nuys and Hazeltine, which would be around the Trader Joe's area, she feels that traffic is exceptionally fast in that area, and indicating that she needs a traffic signal. And you may not feel the traffic signal is appropriate in that stretch, but what about things like mild powers, speed lights that flash on and off, or other ways? So if Joan's not successful in getting a traffic signal put in that mile-long stretch, what can she do? Can she come up with her own suggestions?
She certainly can. I think what we try to do is focus on the problem initially, to understand the problem. In this case, maybe it's speeding. And then we want to look at every potential solution that might help that. So instead of kind of going towards the solution, because we often hear, well, I want this. We appreciate the suggestion, but we want to start with, well, tell us first what is happening so that we can see what are the different options. A traffic signal is one thing that can, primarily it's used to address the order of traffic. So if a side street has either collision history or inability for people to actually turn out of that street, that's sort of the primary factor where a signal may help. We now have other solutions that are actually more appropriate typically if it's a pedestrian issue. We have enhanced crossing features that really make the crosswalks function almost like a traffic signal. We can talk about that. In terms of speeding, I think that, a signal may or may not help. We have to look at it. What I think you mentioned were what we call speed feedback signs, which are the devices that essentially tell you your speed and provide the speed limit as well. And sort of it's an information awareness to the driver who may or may not be paying attention to their speedometer. And they are somewhat effective. I don't want to overstate their effectiveness, but they can help. We do an assessment essentially initially of the speeding conditions. So we would shoot radar, we would evaluate the situation on Riverside in that area, and then we would essentially, once we identify the problem, we could talk about the different potential solutions. And some of those require funding, and some may be more, easier than others. There's also the enforcement aspect where we would partner with law enforcement if it's an issue where that could be helpful. But that's, that's a very common request that we get, and we want to look at every possible thing that can help.
Deputy Chief, I'd like to ask a question from Drew Roberts. Drew, are you here? There she is over there. Drew would like to know whether or not it is possible to employ drones to check on homeless camps in the mountains.
So, excellent question, and the answer is yes, but we have to be thoughtful of privacy issues. We do currently have one of the first drone programs in the entire United States originated here right in the LAFD. We currently have, through our foundation, funded about half a dozen drones that we use with different technologies. One of them is heat, the ability to detect heat in a burn scar. We have not used them to fly over the homeless camps as of yet, but we primarily use them in the wildfire environment and we're looking at possibly using them to locate lost hikers in the hills. And so we're exploring different things. It's very new technology for us in the fire service. We are authorized now to use drones, but we have to coordinate that with the regular aircraft. So it gets, when we talk about a fire traffic area or an FTA, we have to make sure we're not flying drones at the same time we're flying helicopters. So there's some complexities and nuances that we have to manage, but we're always looking for new opportunities. But that one in particular has issues that we need to manage, especially with the privacy issues.
Tom Attorney has a question. Tom is seated over behind that post over there, hiding in the middle of the room. He'd like to know, and Tim, this is for you. You touched upon this earlier, but Tom's an active kind of guy, and he'd like to know if there's anything the Sherman Oaks residents themselves might do to help coordinate the city with the three people that run the apps such as Waze and Google and all these maps that direct people through the streets of our neighborhood. What can we do?
Yeah, the issue with the mapping apps is very challenging, and Tom and I have talked at length about this. I think it's, from the user perspective, I'm not sure if this, as a citizen, you can necessarily influence Waze or those apps. Certainly, anybody can use those apps, so you're welcome to get on there, and essentially they have, I think, ways of getting editing privileges where you can start to be sort of an active user. I think from our perspective, it's very challenging because it's a new thing. I think a lot of times when these things like Uber and Lyft or scooters or Waze come on the scene, they come very rapidly, and government is sometimes taken off guard because it's hard to see those things coming sometimes, at least in the way that they manifest themselves. So the issues that mapping apps have sort of brought with them have come on rapidly and significantly. And so we're still trying to play catch up in addressing those issues. We're pursuing different ways to try to solve it, or at least address it. We're pursuing potential legal remedies, and certainly I can't discuss that, but that's one aspect of it. Another is what we've done in the past is we've made efforts on neighborhood level to introduce restrictions or devices to essentially dissuade people or prevent people from accessing certain streets. But that is extremely challenging because effectively it affects everyone, and it has to go through a very detailed process to ensure there's community consensus. And so we've taken a step back from that, and we're very cautious about doing that because we know that it has to be done very carefully. And it has mixed results in terms of its effectiveness. I think it's just going to be still something that we're trying to wrap our heads around, and we're actively trying to address it, but as of right now, I don't really have any suggestions for necessarily affecting how they operate without maybe just becoming a user yourself and seeing sort of how it works and how you might potentially influence it just as a user, because it is, it's an app that anyone can use, but that's my best advice at this point.
Thank you. Another question from Alan, who wanted to keep his last name private. That's a good question, actually. He says, oak trees are protected, Deputy Richmond. Oak trees are protected, but he's got some oak trees that are close to his house. What, if anything, can he do with those trees other than tearing down his house and moving?
This is going to speak to probably trimming.
So trimming oak trees, basically. They are a protected tree. There's urban forestry. Tim Tyson is the head of urban forestry. The ordinance is that you can trim the trees. You don't need a permit to trim the trees. But our recommendation is if you're going to trim the trees, use a certified arborist. But if you want to double check the codes and laws called urban forestry, on that handout, I have Tim Tyson's number there, and he'll give you the information on dealing with the protected tree ordinance.
Steve Greenbaum. Steve, are you here? Steve has a question. He wants to know, since sometimes those light signals are insensitive to when you pull over to get a left light going on, he'd like to know why they're not activated by the weight of your vehicle, as well as whatever other methods you might have.
So the loops at traffic signals that detect the presence of vehicles are essentially, it's magnetic induction, so it's the presence of metal, it's not a weight issue. And if you have noticed an issue where you think one is not performing appropriately, you should put in a request so we can check it out. It might be a maintenance issue. In terms of left turn arrows, generally speaking, the way the system works is the loop for that purpose is set back so that it requires a certain number of vehicles at certain times of the day to trigger the arrow to come up. It's part of a balancing act to effectively distribute the amount of time to all the different movements at intersections. And the system that we use is an adaptive, smart system. All the signals are linked together, and it's based on network optimization. So oftentimes, you might see a lineup of left-turning cars, and you might wonder why the arrow didn't come up. The system has calculated that at that moment in time, it needed to give that time to a different movement in order to create that optimization. But if you think something's acting funny or doesn't look right, let us know, and we'll check it out.
We have another question here for Deputy Richmond from Mary Ross. Mary, are you here? Oh, there she is, right in front of me. That's why I couldn't see her. My wife says the same thing. She recognizes, like when we had Christine Kim before the meeting talking about the air traffic, we're getting a lot of air traffic over Sherman Oaks, and Mary raises the issue of whether or not the fuel coming from the jets, the particulate fuel as it comes down into the hills particularly, but over any house in Sherman Oaks. Can the fuel from the jets have anything to do with igniting some chipped foliage or anything like that?
So this is going to be probably outside my area of expertise, but what I will offer is that is probably a product of combustion. Any particular matter that's falling is maybe the product of incomplete combustion, and I don't know that it's necessarily flammable. I would have to look at, the lower explosive limit. We have all different measurements that we use for flammable liquids. I don't think it offers anything in addition to what the brush currently offers as far as flammability. There are oils present in the fuels already, and those usually assist and support combustion of the fuels. Some fuels are drier than others. That supports combustion. I don't know that particulate combustibles would add any additional flammability to the fuel that's not already there. How do we find out? I imagine you would have to have some kind of an industrial hygienist evaluate a section of fuel to see what type of product is on the fuel and then in what quantities. But really for us, it's the dryness of the fuels. We call it fuel moisture content. And when our light fuels get down to about 80%, that's when we have explosive fire eruption. So.
Thank you, Deputy Chief. Is Abrams still here? Mr. Abrams has a business here in Sherman Oaks, and we're all kind of interested in his business, or those of us with old cars are interested because he runs a towing service, and he's been told that there are weight restrictions going to apply in the Sherman Oaks area that will prohibit him from having his larger tow trucks operate in this neighborhood. Are you aware of the initiation of any of those new limits? And if so, when will they go into effect?
I'm not sure specifically the location, but basically just to describe that tool specifically, we have the ability to implement weight restrictions on roadways if there is a disproportionate amount of non-local truck traffic on that roadway. That's something we will assess. We can study that. If you observe a situation like that, we can look at it and determine if that's the appropriate course of action. But those restrictions do not apply to local trips or local deliveries or any kind of destination or origin that is local in nature for those vehicles. So if he's trying to tow a vehicle in that area, those signs will not apply to him. They would only apply to regional traffic that is using that neighborhood to bypass whatever route they're normally taking.
Thank you. John Lunderberger, is it Lundberg? John's in the back there, and he points out, we asked about this intersection of almost everybody who gets a chance to talk to us. And another traffic question regarding the on-ramps to the 101 and the 405 at Sepulveda Boulevard. And he indicated that, I guess John lives in that neighborhood, or right in that area of Sherman Oaks, and says it's extremely dangerous for pedestrians to cross that intersection due to the confusing nature of the on-ramps and the on-ramps there. Is your department doing anything to simplify that particular location?
Are we talking about a Greenleaf?
Well, yes, when Greenleaf goes into the freeway, yes.
Okay. Yeah, we know that location is confusing in general. It was part of Caltrans's effort to reconstruct the freeway, and the signage is confusing. So we looked at it a couple times. We have some different ideas in terms of signage, but that's not related to pedestrian activity. That's something we would look at. That's the first time I've heard specifically about pedestrian issues there. I mean, I'm not surprised just because of the confusion, but we would have to look specifically at it, and we'd certainly be open to doing that.
Bobby Baker has a question that might be more up in your alley. Bobby's sitting here in the very front. She wants to know about the timing of the traffic signals on Burbank near Sepulveda. As you go, I guess, over the freeway, the coordination of those signals is less than ideal. Traffic's always backed up around the freeway exits and entrance at Burbank Boulevard just off Sepulveda. Has anybody looked at that particular street to see whether or not the synchronization of the lights could be improved?
That's a very complex and challenging area just because of the proximity between Sepulveda and the ramps, the heavy volume of traffic on both streets, the heavy volume of traffic on the ramps, and the hill. It all adds to kind of a complex, difficult area. I don't know necessarily that it's the coordination of the lights. I think there is some science behind why they operate that way. Sometimes it seems maybe to the initial experience not to be ideal, but what we have looked at, and we've been talking to Caltrans about it, and we plan to continue to talk to them about it, is to potentially reconfigure that location to make the westbound number 1 through lane only onto the freeway. So right now you have to basically merge into a left turn lane, which then opens up to a very, very short second left turn lane. It doesn't have a lot of storage. That's part of the reason that direction backs up, especially in the morning. And because there's so many people getting on the freeway there's actually about the same amount of people getting on the freeway as going straight down Burbank. So it makes sense to give not even half of the space to the people getting on the freeway. So it requires Caltrans to be on board with that, and we're having that conversation with them, and that's something we're trying to make that location better. So.
Tim, I've got one more quick question for you, and then apparently we're all getting booted out of this by the boss. So those of you that haven't had your questions answered yet, you will have the opportunity to come up and speak with each of these gentlemen. I didn't ask a couple of questions because they're a little bit too simple, like Mr. Kelvin's, who wants to know what you're going to do to improve traffic in this city pending the arrival of the Olympics. I got one from Dino Schofield. Mr. Schofield? Dino would like to know what he can do about some burned out street lamps that are on Ventura and Van Nuys Boulevard. He's counted about a half a dozen of them. Who should he complain to? How can he do it? And what are you going to do about it?
Street lamps, basically, those are Bureau of Street Lighting, so your best bet is to contact 311 or go through BSL's website to report those.
Or the council office.
Just the two answers he was hoping to be given.
Okay, Jules, come up. We have a raffle, and then we're going to go allow you to come up one-on-one. Also, remember, 4th Wednesday of October.